I hate technology. I'm just not good at it, I guess. I spent a crazy amount of time yesterday recording the presentation of the notes, and as soon as I tried saving it, it said it saved, exited out of the program, and it was gone. So, yeah. Hopefully that's not going to happen today, and we'll be able to get this up sooner rather than later, so that I don't have to keep on moving this forward. I would much rather be in the classroom. I know you guys probably enjoy to some extent being at home, but I'm just not very good at technology, so this is kind of tough on me. So please bear with me. So probably by now you've been stuck at home for a while. You're probably being inundated with news and being on the internet. You may have seen this video that's been circulating about these celebrities singing Imagine by John Lennon. So it's pretty cringy, and they're getting a lot of flack on the internet for this. But the reason why is not because they did a bad job. Well, they did a bad job. But the reason why they're getting such flack is because they're singing this song about, not having possessions, not having anything to live or die for, not really anything existing at all. And yet they're doing this as celebrities who are famous. They're making this, it seems like they're making this whole situation about them, and they're recording themselves in their multi-million-dollar mansions. What's hilarious about it is that it seems to be the antithesis of what they're singing about, and by singing about it, they're preaching about it. So I want to look at that for a second, and then I want to look at that song. Don't get me wrong, I love the Beatles. I think John Lennon is one of the greatest musicians of all time, but that song is the perfect embodiment of cultural relativism. It is like the anthem of postmodernism. And so, fortunately, today we get to look back fondly before relativism really took root in the world, and look back at a time when there was actually something to live and to die for. That there was something worth putting all of your energy into, which apparently John Lennon didn't want, I guess. But yeah, today we're going to be focusing on the philosophical works, but specifically the idea of ethics from one of probably the most famous philosopher of all time, an old Greek guy by the name of Aristotle. I don't know where we would be without the big three Greek philosophers. Everybody knows who they are, but nobody really knows what they teach, especially individually. And I've mentioned this before in previous classes, but just to reiterate, because it's important in the world of philosophy. Back in the times of Aristotle, back in the times of ancient Athens, philosophy was considered a noble pursuit. A lot of people wanted to be a part of studying philosophy. But again, it was only young men who were allowed to study it. So they would go to school specifically to study philosophy. And the way that they studied philosophy is they would go to a specific school. But the school that they chose was not like a modern high school where you have multiple teachers who are all teaching different subjects, and you may have good teachers, you may have bad teachers, but they're all under the umbrella of the school. During this time in history, people would go to school, and they would go to the school that was being taught by the teacher that they wanted. So Aristotle, he went to the school of Plato. So he studied under his teacher Plato. And Plato, when he was younger, he went to the school of Socrates. So Socrates was his teacher when he was younger. So Aristotle is formed by Plato, Plato is formed by Socrates. What's awesome about this time in history, though, was that education was not merely indoctrination. I think, especially for younger students, like elementary school, middle school aged, what tends to happen is their teacher will tell them something and they just take that as truth, and that's their worldview. I'm sure that happens a lot in the United States. I'm sure that happens a lot at Judge, and I'm sure that happens a lot in my class. But at that time, that wasn't necessarily the case. The philosophical teachers would give their students a foundation, and that foundation allowed them to form their own philosophies. So if you actually study those three big philosophers, you can see that they are all very individual from each other and different from each other, despite the fact that they all learned from each other. Aristotle is often seen as the opposite of Plato, despite him being the student of Plato. And so today we have a lot of people who say that Aristotelianism and Platonism are competing against each other, or you tend to prefer one over the other. The reason why we're focusing on Aristotle, though, is because Aristotle is one of the few Greek philosophers who deals specifically with ethics. All the information that we get from Aristotle's ethics comes from a book that he wrote that he named after his son Nicomachus. The book is called Nicomachean Ethics, and we'll probably go back to this specific text a lot in the course of this semester. Hopefully you'll notice a lot of similarities in what I have already taught you and what Aristotle is going to be teaching in today's note sheet, which I'm going to give you a very brief look and a very brief outline of what he's actually trying to say. So when I want you all to look back at the ethical school placement that you got. If you subscribe to the ideas of Aristotle, you would have been placed in a school that had to do with virtue. So there was really only one school that anybody placed into that has to do with Aristotle, and that was contemporary virtue ethics. And within that school, there were only 2 students who got placed in that school. But I'm sure a lot of you will find some value in Aristotle based on some of the things that we cover right now. But there's a big disagreement. It's kind of like the first question that you have to ask to understand where somebody stands on ethics. Do we believe that what is right and what is wrong, does that come from within us? That's something that's driving us? Or is that something that's been formed outside of us? Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, or really anybody, especially ancient, who believed in the concept of deities, believed that it was instilled in us. They believed that there is a human nature. And so Aristotle's ethics is going to be really dominated by this idea that everything that we know and understand comes from within us, not from without. But there's still going to be a lot of things that I think a lot of you will agree with, even if you disagree with that claim. So this should sound pretty familiar. Aristotle believed that every single thing in existence, from the tiniest little particle to a mountain, everything in existence seems to have a goal or a purpose that defines its existence. He gives 2 examples. The first is an acorn. He says that an acorn, its purpose, its goal, is to eventually become an oak tree. Another example that he gives is a human eye. The purpose of the human eye is to be able to see, to give sight to its owner. So if an acorn doesn't become an oak tree, well, it's lost its meaning, it's lost its purpose. If an eye is unable to see, then it's lost its meaning and its purpose and its goal, and it's become sort of an unnecessary thing. That goal, that purpose that defines its existence, He calls that the object's ultimate end. You all should know the Greek word for ultimate end. It is telos. But he is totally willing to admit that sometimes there are things that are unable to reach their ultimate end for whatever reason. And then at the same time, there are some things that can't even attempt to work towards their ultimate end for whatever reason. Just because you have a telos does not mean you may necessarily reach it, which he's very clear about. But most importantly, Aristotle says humans are the exact same. Humans also have this telos. So I want you to think for a second. What is it that all humans seem to strive for? What are we working towards? Go back to your notes, the foundational definitions. What is our telos? Well, Aristotle gives us a very concrete answer that I think a lot of you, if not all of you, would agree with. He saw that the ultimate goal in humans seemed to be happiness. He uses the Greek term eudaimonia. Eudaimonia probably has a few different translations. The most clear translation is most likely the word blessed or blessedness. That this is a gift from something outside of you. Happiness is a gift from something outside of you. So he asks this question, why do you want happiness? And he says that question is impossible to answer. It is an unanswerable question because it's self-explanatory. Happiness is the only reason why you make decisions in your life. And this is how you can determine, at least immediately, very, very easily, what your telos is. And I do this often when I ask a student, and I've probably asked a lot of you this question, and I've probably annoyed a lot of you with this question. Why are you here today? Well, because I need to go to school. Why do you need to go to school? I need to get an education and I need to get good grades. Why do you need to do that? Well, so that I can get into a good college. Why do you want to get into a good college? So that I could get a degree. Why do you want a degree? So that I could get a job. Why do you want a job? So I can make a lot of money. Why do you want money? So I can buy things or, provide for my family. Well, why do you want to do that? So that I can live a happy and fulfilling life. Well, why do you want a happy and fulfilling life? That is the end of that line of questioning. That is the whole purpose as to why you're making the decisions in your life right now. Now, it's worth noting here, there's a difference between temporary present happiness and long-lasting future happiness, and that tends to be the argument of ethics. Like, what's more important, being happy right now or being more happy later? Which we'll get to in a second. But that's the end of the line of questioning for your motivations and your goals. Happiness is it. That's the answer. But the issue is, how do we go about achieving happiness, and what is happiness? We all seem to have very different understandings or definitions of happiness for ourselves. So Aristotle wants to go into this when he's discussing ethics.